Unfortunately, there's such a lack of representation of Black and brown children in children's literature and also in children's education. And it has a really, really negative impact that plays such a strong part in how children see themselves and their position in the world. When children don't see themselves represented, they think that is a representation in itself of the world that they're in. And when it's consistent that certain types of children are not centered or prioritized in stories, it gives the impression that they shouldn't be and are not centered and cannot be prioritized in life, in society, and the communities that we're in.
Hi, EnvisionAirs. It's Nicole here. Welcome to the EnvisionAir podcast. This is the podcast where we envision living our best lives by exploring everyday topics related to health, wealth, and community. On today's episode, we will be exploring the community aspect of the podcast, and we're going to be speaking with Louisa Kiwana Olafuyi. Her story about how she and her fellow co-founders, including her husband, Dele, created Kunda Kids, a hugely successful, award-winning children's publishing, ed tech, and media company, all within the last 3 years. My hope with this episode is that you will learn more about the significance of having diversity and inclusion in children's literature and feel inspired by Louisa's story to pursue your dreams, no matter how out of reach they may seem. So, a very warm welcome to Louisa. Welcome to the EnvisionAir podcast.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, Nicole. And hello, EnvisionAirs. It's lovely to be here.
Amazing. Well, we're happy to have you. So, Louisa, I normally invite guests to share a bit about themselves and their backgrounds. Obviously, given Kunda Kids is all about children's books, I'd love for you to share a bit about your childhood and especially, were you a big reader yourself growing up?
Wow. So looking back to my childhood, I would say that I was a big reader and definitely had a curiosity about learning about people and the world and the environment around me. I think growing up as an only child gave me a lot of time, both by myself and with myself. And I used a lot of that time to read, to write, and to do a lot of imaginative play. And I think that that's what sort of really cultivated and sharpened my creativity.
That's really interesting. Yeah. And was there one book in particular that really impacted, let's say, your childhood, how you saw the world, and that you really still carry to this day very close to your heart?
Yeah, so I'd say one book, and I'm sure that there's so many, but I can't remember, but one that really stands out to me was a book, and it's actually quite a well-known classic. It's called Heidi. And this book was given to me by my aunt, and also my godparent. She gave me my first book ever, which was a Bible, and that was from a £10 lottery ticket that I had won with my dad when he played. And I was like, really? That was not what I planned to spend with that £10. But anyway, she continued to be one of the people in my life that seemed to always invest in reading culture for me. And I think the second or third book she got me was Heidi. So she gave me this book with this blonde Scandinavian young girl in some Scandinavian mountains, and I thought, what am I supposed to get from this book? You know, the person that I'm looking at looks completely different from me. I'm sure we'll have nothing in common. But it ended up being a really interesting story, and it really exposed me to complex relationships and dynamics that, you know, she had with her grandparents and her own aspirations about how she wanted to grow up. And although our lives, our backgrounds and our situations were so different, I really enjoyed stepping into somebody else's shoes, exploring myself through her own challenges and her own view. And that was, I think, my first introduction and experience into how powerful stories can be, not only informing you about other people and cultivating a sense of empathy, but also about teaching you about yourself through other people's experiences.
Amazing. And I feel like, well, and that's, I think, what Kunda Kids does so well, because I remember when we met at the UK Black Business Show a few months ago, I was really, really drawn to the beautiful imagery that I saw on the stall where you laid out all these beautiful children's books, and they were so compelling, and the imagery on the cover was so beautiful and dynamic, and to see all these images from different parts, I guess, of Africa in terms of like costumes and the imagery of the backgrounds and the landscape. I was immediately drawn to that stall. And I think I have told you the story before, how like I did like a double or triple take, and I kept kind of walking back and forth because I was so drawn to it. And I was like, what is this? And then when I ended up coming around and actually talking to you, thankfully, you were telling me about the mission of the books and what they were meant to do. But then you also kind of shared about this idea of opening up people's experiences, children's experiences, and becoming a lot more empathetic and understanding of other people's, children's experiences and that impact. So can you tell us a little bit about the mission of Kunda Kids and how it all started?
Absolutely. And I mean, I love to hear that you've walked past us and there's something about our books and something about our illustrations that really spoke to you. So going back to what I talked about with this book about Heidi, this character that looked so different to me, but really exposed me to a different culture, a different place in the world, a different way of thinking and being and doing things, is exactly what I wanted to do with Kunda Kids. Unfortunately, there's such a lack of representation of Black and brown children in children's literature and also in children's education. And it has a really, really negative impact that plays such a strong part in how children see themselves and their position in the world. When children don't see themselves represented, they think that that is a representation in itself of the world that they're in. And when it's consistent that certain types of children are not centered or prioritized in stories, it gives the impression that they shouldn't be and are not centered and cannot be prioritized in life, in society, and the communities that we're in. So at Kunda Kids, which was very much inspired by my own journey into parenting and becoming a parent and really thinking about the resources that I wanted to be able to nurture my son with as he grows up to be, hopefully a positive person in this world that we live in. I knew that I wanted him to not only be represented in the content that he reads, but I wanted his friends, his future peers, colleagues, whoever they are, to grow up being exposed to his culture, his heritage. And the same way it's important and there was value to derive from me learning about Heidi and what it's like to live in Sweden and Scandinavian culture. Growing up as a global citizen, it's essential. It's the same way I want all children to have exposure. And more specifically, Africa as a continent, Africans as people, our culture, our history, and our heritage has had such an unjust representation in media, and also an unjust representation in children's literature, media, and even educational resources, that Kunda Kids was dedicated and created to dedicate itself to rebalancing the narrative and promoting the importance of children learning about the world around us. And one analogy I really like to use, Nicole, is when our favorite artists, be it Beyonce or U2 or whoever your favorite artist is, but the big ones, when they're doing a world tour, it seldom includes Africa. And Africa is an entire continent. You'll see Europe, you'll see US, you'll see Asia, Australia, but Africa is consistently missing in the global narrative. And especially when children learn about the world, if it's not missing, it's extremely limited or misinformed. So Kunda Kids is designed to promote literacy, but more so promote the importance of raising global citizens and the importance of giving children an opportunity to learn about the world, themselves, and how we are individual, but all connected somehow. And I think storytelling is such a powerful way in doing that.
I love that. I mean, that is so incredible. I love the idea, like, how you described we're all global citizens and the next generation of like the children, you know, they are the next generation and they are the global citizens. And that's the vision of Kunda Kids, is like this huge, very harmonized, you know, young people working together and having those sorts of shared experiences and almost just like shared knowledge. But I also love the idea of having a more inclusive narrative, global narrative, and including Africa in that as well. And I think that's so beautifully put. And so how did you, because I know this started 3 years ago, and from what I have read, you know, in your background, you were actually working in a corporate job beforehand. And so how does one, I mean, again, I love that was the motivation, but then how do you go from corporate, you know, you were doing you had a great job in corporate and then jump into publishing? I mean, it's incredible. Can you tell us a little bit about why that shift? And because a lot of people would, having, I think, the mission and that sort of drive, they would probably just say, great, I'm going to like make sure that I buy more diverse books, maybe for my children. But you were like, I'm going to create this. So tell us a bit about that. And
yeah, absolutely. And I hope this really speaks to anybody that sometimes is wondering how their life experiences or eclectic skills are going to come together and make sense, because I spent a lot of time in my life feeling that, as somebody who initially started in design, and then I worked in journalism and I studied journalism at university. I fell in love with the practice around market research and finding out about people and understanding consumer behavior quantitatively and qualitatively. So I wasn't sure how my marketing, innovation, design, journalism was all going to come together. And I'm really glad that it did in the most wonderful way. But my experience really was, again, quite eclectic. I was working at Unilever as an innovation specialist by the time I decided to work at Kunda Kids full time. And I'm very privileged to say that I had an amazing job. I worked with some of the brightest minds in this world and in a really, really positive and healthy work environment. And it felt really good to go from something good to something great, right? A lot of people get forced into entrepreneurship sometimes as a means of survival and having to think on your feet. But I was quite lucky to really make a conscious decision to step in and dedicate myself to Kunda Kids. But prior to working at Unilever, I had worked at Cambridge University Press. And my background before that had been quite commercial. Mobile phones, lipstick, makeup, you know, all the very consumer-centric stuff. But I had to move to Cambridge because my husband was doing his MBA at Cambridge University and we wanted to be together. So I also had to uproot and move too. And Nicole, I was like, what am I going to do in Cambridge? I didn't have really a background in academia, but I managed to get a great product marketing job at Cambridge University Press. And that was my introduction, my proper introduction to the business of publishing, the business of education, right? And that ecosystem and how that works. And in that, within that time, I wasn't really quite sure how all the wonderful things I was learning were going to be relevant to me moving forward, because I always knew that I was business minded. I loved consumer marketing, and I didn't see myself necessarily getting into education or academia per se, but I was very open-minded and I just wanted to make the most of that experience and learn as much as I could. So it was so interesting to me to later down the line decide to go into publishing and feel so grateful that I had the opportunity to soak in all of this knowledge. So I'm saying all of that to say that I think sometimes we can all be on our own individual journeys and not really quite sure why we are where we are. And I would just, always recommend during those periods of uncertainty, just try to make the best of the situation. Try to be as open-minded and to learn as much as you can, because down the line, a lot of the time it does make sense, and you never want to feel like you didn't make the most of the moment. So
love that.
That was a little bit about me. But after becoming a parent, becoming a mom in 2019, and not knowing that COVID and lockdown was around the corner, I did start thinking to myself, what kind of resources do I want for my son? And my husband and I came to the conclusion that in order to grow up with a strong sense of self and pride in who you are and who you want to be, you need to have an understanding and an appreciation of where you came from. And unfortunately, I would say within the broader Black diaspora, there is a lot of misinformation and sometimes just lack of information about African history and heritage. And an example of that is in school. What I learned about Black history started and stopped with slavery. That's what I was taught at school, about where Black people come from. What is Africa? What was Africa useful for? And unfortunately, the answers that I derived at a young age were that it was about slavery, and that's the reason why I'm here. But actually, that's very incorrect. I wasn't in the UK because I was a descendant of, or I wasn't my family and my ancestors were part of slavery, as far as I know. But it's dangerous for not only me to think that about myself, but for my peers to think that that is the sum of my heritage, right? And it nurtures an inferiority complex in children who are Black and brown, and it nurtures a superiority in children who have been told a different version of stark contrast, right? So the first thing we realized that we wanted to address is self-confidence and identity in children from a young age. So we started to look at African history as being an important part of the curriculum that was missing. We couldn't find the books that we wanted to write, and we didn't find that there was any children's books that were written for preschool children. So anything from 3 to 6 years that introduced them to African history. So we set about writing some stories, and the intention really was just to write them for our son and read them at home and do our best as parents to mitigate against what he wouldn't be taught in school. But the more that we spoke to our friends and family members, they were like, oh, but I want some too. And we knew that we couldn't just send them like a PDF first draft of whatever we were putting together. We had to put it in a decent state. And then we realized that if this is something that we need and want, and our friends and family need and want, their friends and family are probably going to need and want. And I think we've got a bigger issue about a significant information gap missing for children that we can potentially fill.
Yeah, 100%. Oh, that's incredible. Honestly, Louisa, I guess I remember getting really choked up when I saw the ABC book, because specifically for that reason, because when I was growing up and I learned about my ABCs and reading and so on, the books that I remember reading are the Lady Bird series with Peter and Jane. And again, very nostalgic. I feel a real nice sense of comfort when I think of that, because it evokes memories of me reading with my parents, which I cherish. But there was not much diversity in those books. And when I grew up, even though I'm mixed race, I think I knew I was different. I was like, I was a different sort of child in that way, right? Like I knew I was different. I didn't understand race per se, but I knew I wasn't like a white Canadian child, if you will. And that's very interesting when you talked about like the identity and the sort of confidence, because whenever we used to learn about race and so on, and people of, non-white heritage, the history that we learned, you're absolutely right. It's this idea of like, almost like seeing it as a victim, right? And this identity that you're almost created in your mind, right? And you're not given the full history and the richness that comes with that, the history from where your forefathers came from. So I think it's really, really fascinating. I thought it was incredible that you teach ABCs using African words, tools, concepts, and imagery. And you have so much diversity and inclusion in these books, because I do think that that is going to have a huge impact on the confidence of children, because they now can look and understand their history in a different way, in a really positive way. And I think that's so beautiful. So I guess you've answered my question already about why there is such a need to focus intentionally on diverse and inclusive representation. And I really liked hearing also about how you guys have built Kunda Kids. But I guess my question to you is, what has been one of the most challenging barriers that you've been able to overcome, and how did you overcome it?
I would say the biggest barrier that we've had to overcome, okay, I would say there are multiple barriers that we've had to overcome with Kunda Kids. The first is more about the industry. So I saw this firsthand working in publishing, that it's quite an elitist industry to work in, and there are reasons for that. I think, and I strongly believe, that information is power, and access to information, the restriction of information has often been used strategically to empower others and to disempower others. So I find it unfortunate, but also sometimes unsurprising, about the lack of diversity in publishing, especially the lack of diversity in publishing in the UK in particular. And this is not just about the books that are created, the authors that are given an opportunity to write them, but it's also about the structures and the decision makers of a lot of the players in the publishing industry. So our entry into publishing and into children's media wasn't very smooth, and I wouldn't say that it was completely welcomed with open arms either. A lot of marketing and PR companies were not interested in telling our story, and we were overlooked, I think, for a significant amount of time, because we were an independent Black publishing company, and it just wasn't resonating with people that there was quality and something important that we were doing and a message that needed to be said. And I don't believe that this was because people were intentionally trying to be discriminatory. I just think that it's a culture that manifests in publishing, unfortunately, and that culture just also becomes way of life. And we started with publishing at Kunda Kids because we really wanted to anchor a lot of what we were doing within the education space. And although so much is going digital in the world, I genuinely do also still believe in the value of a physical book, and the value of a physical book as part of a child's learning adventure and their learning story. So there is a time and place for digital content, but we still wanted to make sure that we were giving the time, the space, and the value to physical books. And I think that 3 years on, we've made tremendous strides, not only in showcasing the importance of independent publishers such as ourselves, but also in demonstrating that there is a need to reimagine the publishing and children's content industry as a whole. And that was always our ambition. And I would say that 2023 was a significant year for us in shifting from what a lot of people saw as, a small, cute, family-owned publishing company that just creates a few titles, into a global business that is actually here to disrupt children's media in a positive way. And I think it's been a tremendous year in moving the needle on the perception, not only on what companies like Kunda Kids can do, but the importance of our existence in raising global citizens, and also the need to positively disrupt things sometimes. I would say the other challenge that we've had is around the perception of diverse books for only diverse people. And I remember, being an 80s an 80s baby, but growing up and seeing brands like Fubu, which I loved, which had the slogan "For Us by Us," which was really important to have products and to have messages that really showed that this product is made by the Black community for the Black community. But Kunda Kids is quite different in our mission, because we want to make sure that our content is representing the lack of children who are not represented in the content that they consume. But we want Kunda Kids content to be fun, enjoyable, relatable to all children. When I talked earlier about my experiences in school and learning about Black history in the way that it was only presented as a derivative of slavery, these are the kind of this is the kind of information and the kind of misinformation that nurtures ignorance and nurtures discriminatory ideologies in children from such a young age. And it's important to understand that those communities that are discriminated against do not discriminate against themselves. So as important as it is to be represented in the content that you read, the challenges that we'll face in the real world will not so much be from our own doing. It's because there is already a system in place, and that system thrives because of misinformation and empathy. So it's important that all children, not just Black children, get to read about stories about Africa, about different cultures, about different places, and have an interest and a curiosity for learning about different people. Learning about yourself and self-identity is key, but also understanding its context in relation to the wider world is important. And we want children to learn about Africa and be exposed to stories that celebrate African history and culture and heritage, but we want Africa to be showcased and taught to young people in relation to its contribution to the rest of the world, in relation to how Africa's history, resources, culture is impactful in the US, is impactful in the UK, has influenced development in other countries. So really trying to give a much more broader perspective as to why it's important to learn about different people and cultures. And we met at the UK Business Show, which is one of the many events that we go and showcase what we're doing at Kunda Kids. And it's so often that sometimes people will come up to our stall, look at our books and say, wow, I love your titles, I love this story. My neighbor's really going to love it. And I'll be like, oh, really? Do you have any kids yourself? And they'll be like, oh, yes, I do. Oh, my daughter's friend is really going to like this. I think she's from Ghana or whatever it is. And trying to have that conversation that you don't have to just be Black, or you don't have to be African, or you don't have to be brown and Black to enjoy these stories, that these are beautiful stories that can be enjoyed by everybody with universal morals that are applicable to everybody, and lessons that are transferable to so many ways in life. So that's been one of our challenges, is being able to show and articulate the importance of everybody being able to enjoy Kunda Kids stories, and that though our focus is on uplifting the representation and inclusion of Africa in children's content, it's not just for African children, it's for all children to enjoy. And just as another note, I often spend a lot of time in schools and I ask, name me a king or queen, and unanimously every child will always say Queen Elizabeth. And that's absolutely fine, for sure, she's a queen, but it can't be the only queen that we know. There's Queen Moremi from Nigeria, there's Queen Kitami from Uganda, there's, so many queens to talk about. And I think it's really important just to level the playing field and understand the same way I had the pleasure of growing up and learning about Henry VIII is the same way a child can grow up and learn about Mansa Musa and Shaka Zulu. It's perfectly fine, and it's what should happen, and it is what is needed in the curriculum.
So when you were talking about, I mean, thank you so much for sharing so much about some of the challenges you guys have faced. Obviously, this idea that the barriers to even entry, which a lot of people face. And so I would love to hear, I mean, how exactly did you tackle that? Was it simply by networking with the right people? And was it just simply by continuing to put yourself out there to people, even if someone said no or was not very transparent with information or kind of, maybe icing you out in different ways? Was it just kind of persevering through that and just seeing, just reaching out to as many people as possible? Was it also maybe moving to a different geography? Like, was it simply in the UK, or did you look at other, within different jurisdictions? How did you get past that sort of barrier to entry to now being a well-established authority within the children's publishing sphere?
Okay, so I wouldn't say that we got past the barrier as much as we just broke it down. We just kicked it down and just
Amazing.
decided that it was in the way. So when we had our stories, right, the first question was, who are we going to publish them? Before the idea of becoming a publisher even came to mind, Nicole. So we had our stories, and we thought, if we take this to a big publisher, we don't feel that they will even know how to market it. We don't feel that they're even going to be able to understand the importance of this. And we don't feel that they even had a grassroots, genuine connection with the communities that we're trying to serve. And having come from a marketing background, and Dele is a marketing strategist himself, rather ambitiously, and maybe, I wouldn't even say that it was arrogance of pride. I would just say that it was facts. We knew that we could market our books, our stories, and the value behind our mission better than the best publishing executives that we knew.
Wow.
We didn't think that even the biggest giants would genuinely be able to tell what we needed to tell and the reason why we needed to tell it better than ourselves. So, and this leads very much into how we managed to do what we're doing, and how we were able to finance it at the time. So publishing is a very expensive business to be in. It is lucrative if you get it right, but it requires a lot of initial capital, because publishing, printing books is expensive, and it only becomes more affordable the more that you're able to print. Economies of scale. So if you can print in large quantities, you can get your unit cost down. But if you can only print in maybe hundreds or thousands, then the unit cost for each book will be much higher. And then you'll have the struggle of trying to compete with other great books that are significantly lower priced. So that's why the bigger publishing agencies and companies can do much better, because they can not only compete in terms of content quality, but they can compete in terms of price and distribution. So we sat down and we looked at the economics of just getting our first 4 books done. And, we had a lot of priorities as a family. As you can imagine, we'd gone through lockdown, a lot of unexpected changes. And in addition to just being new parents, which is just an expensive experience as it is, but we sacrificed some really important things that we, some things that mattered to us that we wanted to do with our money, and decided that if we can bank on ourselves, that we know that we're onto something, right? So we took a really sizable proportion of our savings. I think it was maybe about like 10 grand or something at the time, I don't remember. About that, and said, okay, let's finance getting a good editor, right? And let's see if we can get some good illustrations done. And having come from a market research background, my first thing to do was let's test. Let's see what's missing. Let's look at what we think is a good idea, what we think is a good image, what we think is a good visual language, and let's validate, let's challenge everything that we're thinking. And we took on this project like it was a project at work, and we said, I'm going to approach it with the same energy that I would do a whole innovation project at work, or a market research exercise. So we did the research. I spent a lot of time browsing shelves and speaking to parents, and I'd come from a qualitative research background, so I was quite comfortable just to approach people and ask them what they think about things. And I was also flung into the world of baby and mum groups because I had just become a mum. So I used that opportunity to have conversations about what they were reading, what their children were responding to. It's great having become a parent, but I couldn't use just my son as a single test bed for everything that we wanted to do. So we started testing. And we started looking, this was my favorite part, looking at illustrations and understanding that a lot of the content around Africa was really rustic, which is what the children used and the parents used to describe it, that it was just a bit too woody and earthy, whereas other brands like Disney felt a lot cleaner and smoother. But at the same time, children were saying that they necessarily didn't want to go all the way Disney, that they actually liked something in the middle that felt authentic and felt cultural and felt African and vibrant, and not necessarily just taking a Western aesthetic and making it brown. So we knew that there was work to do about really creating authenticity and creating a very specific space around representing Africa authentically, but also doing it with modernity and doing it with finesse and making Africa aspirational. So that became our mission, and how we wanted Kunda Kids to make people feel. We wanted it to feel authentic and connected, but we wanted it to be modern and cool and aspirational and clean, and taking visual cues from other industries. So
that's so fascinating.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's how we kind of initially launched, and then we bet on ourselves and printed our first 10,000 books, which arrived and flooded our whole house. And we were sitting there in a house full of boxes of books, like, okay, what now? So we bought some envelopes. We were starting to have conversations with people, and we had planned to launch and set up our social media pages on a specific day. But before we could even get ready for that launch date, one person that we had told another person, and people were already reaching out to us to pre-order what we hadn't even set up yet. So with literally just having a list on a notepad like this of people that were interested, we quickly registered the domain, went on Shopify, got whatever subscription we could get that would let us sell, and then just started taking orders, and that was it. And that was just before Christmas. I literally had paper cuts from all the books that I was packing. And I think at the end of Christmas, that's when my husband and I were like, we should actually really sit down and talk about this.
Wow.
And figure out what this means.
Yeah, because you guys were both, I mean, were you on mat leave at the time, I guess?
No, so at this point, we weren't at mat leave. We had moved back to London, actually, because our jobs needed us to be in London at that time. So we had moved back to London. I was still working at that time, but then my husband made a decision to leave his job. So he left his job and said, I'm going to commit to Kunda Kids full time. And having just finished his MBA at Cambridge, and it was very much centered on entrepreneurship, he said, let me figure out the nuts and bolts of this and see how viable this is as a business, and actually look at it from an investment perspective, look at it from a growth perspective, and try to kind of forecast how much energy we should put into this. So he did that, and then I had to take a back seat, but I was still inputting on ideas and still doing a bit of writing and aiding in the design. But he was now working on this full time. And then our friends and family were like, you need capital in order to make this bigger. This
Yeah.
is actually bigger than just books. And that's when we
Yeah.
decided to start the Kunda Kids app and the development of it. And we said, how do we take these stories and create a digital experience? And then we also
Mm-hmm.
knew we wanted to do animations, because I had sat for too many hours watching Coco Melon, not out of choice. So I thought, I think we can do something more innovative in this space. So we managed to raise 170,000 US dollars, just from our friends and family. We're so blessed to have a
Wow.
great network of, of people that really supported us and really believed not only in the business, but in Dele and myself as individuals, and trusted us to do something with this. So we did that, and that is what helped us kind of initiate the development of the app. And
Mm-hmm.
started even just thinking about the ideas of animations, and
Yes.
made us audacious enough to then start thinking, let's go and raise from VCs.
I love that. You know what? There's sometimes this audacious is sometimes considered a bad word, like a negative, but I actually think audaciousness is great. And I think that we have to have audacious thoughts sometimes because it helps us to break through our limiting beliefs. And I wonder, did you, throughout the last 3 years, have there been moments where you have had some limiting beliefs, whether it's imposter syndrome, whether it's, you know, doubt, self-doubt? Have you guys faced that?
I've always had this voice inside of me. I don't know where it comes from, but it's just like an internal belief system. And it's not really arrogance or pride. It's just genuinely what I believe in and of myself, that I'm destined to do great things. I don't know what they are, but I always knew I'm not just going to live like I'm not going to be bored with my life. I knew that. And I didn't know how necessarily that was going to manifest. But I had always felt sometimes in situations, and I think we talked about this, Nicole, and particularly what some being in a corporate environment for a long time can sometimes make you feel that you need to break out, that somehow there's more for you to offer, and that you're bigger than this. But I didn't necessarily know how. So I've always risen to occasions where I get to try something new, where I get to put myself out there. And I do, I do love that about myself. It's just in my nature. And this is why I'm so, it's such an important mission for me that children get an opportunity to believe the positive things about themselves as early as possible. I think we underestimate just how early these limited beliefs become embedded and start to grow. And the work that we've done around building confidence in children, we ran a Confident Kids workshop a couple of years ago with PwC, which taught me so much. And one of the things that it taught me was that as young as 6 years old is when children start to reason with themselves that they might not be worthy, and start to really look at what they can't do and decide whether they want to believe that narrative or not. And for a lot of us, it's only in our 20s, 30s, 40s, and sometimes even 50s and above, but in our adult life, that we start to reassess our limited beliefs, and we start to actually live in the true value of what we're capable of doing. So I'm very lucky that I don't know why I've always had this thought internally, and it probably has a lot to do with what I have been told and encouraged about who I am. My family, my grandparents, my parents have always just told me that I come from greatness and that they don't expect nothing but the best from me. So I think maybe that has been internalized somehow. So I think in the audacity of trying something new and just trying it, and even if it fails, it's okay. That's not something that worried me. But once we had started doing it and had proved some kind of success, is when I think I started to be a little bit self-doubting, because I'm like, okay, now I've done this, I really don't want to let people down. And I was so proud and I felt so blessed that we raised such a significant amount from our friends and family. But it is also so intimidating to pitch to your friends and family. And I would rather pitch to a VC than my friends and family any day of the week. Because rejection from people that you don't know, just falls off your back. But when it's from people that you know, it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable, and it's more emotional. So I think that there was a lot more pressure that was applied, especially after we started raising some capital. And but now I think that I've understood that fear sometimes just can be healthy. It can remind you of how much this means to you. It's kind of like an internal risk assessment where you start thinking, oh my God, if I let people down, this is what's going to happen. If I don't put myself forward, how will I feel if things don't work and I know I didn't do my best? It makes you accountable. I think it's just the extent to which you want to entertain that. And I'm a very, very big advocate in any business owner, when anybody, but particularly any business owner and particularly any female founder, to really make sure that you have a strong network of and a strong support system, sometimes where you can hash out your insecurities, sometimes that you can have somebody to laugh and cry with. I'm very fortunate that that person is also my partner and my husband. So I literally am doing this with somebody that understands it inside and out and understands me inside and out. But I think those moments of self-doubt will always be there in various ways, and they're not always a bad thing. It's just about how much we allow ourselves to exercise and entertain negative thoughts. And I would say it's about deriving wisdom from your emotions, not being led by your emotions.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Do you know what, Louisa? We're going to have you come on again and talk purely about mindset of successful entrepreneurs, because I think that was so beautifully put, what you just said. And it's definitely going to help a lot of people who are wanting to pursue and take on the entrepreneurship, but are still kind of on the fence or having that imposter syndrome. And so I think that's really, really, we're going to have you come on and talk about that. Well, I just, now we're getting towards the end of the podcast, and we're reaching the EnvisionAir questionnaire section. And this is the part where we ask the guests to reflect on their past, present, and future. And I just wanted to ask you a few questions. Are you up for it?
Yes, let's do it.
Amazing. Right. Okay. Well, looking towards your past, if you could give your 15-year-old self any advice, what would it be and why?
I would give the advice that I would give myself, and it might be an advice or just a practice to try and exercise, is to just get comfortable sometimes with the uncomfortable, right? And I think that the fear of something can make you think that you don't want it, right? Because you have reservations or fears about it, but actually you can really want something, and you let the fear of failure, the fear of rejection, the fear of performance make you think that you don't want that thing. And I would really have loved to have cultivated an attitude of feeling the fear but doing it anyway much earlier.
I love that. That's such good advice. Amazing advice. Do you feel like at 15 you were a little bit scared and fearful of that?
I think that at 15, I was trying to understand why it was so difficult to conform, right? And I think, like most teenagers, you want to be able to fit in, and you want to be able to, get approval and validation from your peers. But I was just always on my own. I was always marching to the beat of my own drum. And I just never really felt inclined to be what other people expected me to be. And I would say even just within the Black community growing up, it's like there was always the expectation that Black people must be like this, and this is what you should listen to, and the music that you should like, or how you should dress. And I think I found myself just being a rebel, I felt like I was made to feel like I was a rebel without a cause, but actually I was a rebel with a cause. And I think that cause was about advocating for my own uniqueness and individuality. Um, but I came to see that later on in life.
Oh, wow. Amazing. Well, I'm sure your 15-year-old self would be super impressed with
Honestly,
your
I
now
think she was
self, your
so
present
cool, but
self.
I think my 15-year-old self was so cool, but I don't know if anybody else felt the same.
I'm sure. I'm sure. Right. Well, reflecting in the present, if you could seek advice from anyone in the world, who would it be?
If I could seek advice from anybody in the world, honestly, I don't even think that he would say that much. I feel like he would give me a one-liner and I'd be like, is that it? But I'd really have to ponder it. But I think if I could seek advice from anybody, I'd honestly seek advice from Jesus, because I just love that there's so much to unpack from what he says. And I love that he just has so much grace, and there are only a very few instances that I can think of where he's reactive, and he seemed to dictate his own time, his decisions. He wasn't he wasn't impacted by by people and influence. But I would love to just I'd love to take advice from Jesus. I'd love for him to sit down and give me a riddle or a proverb, and I'd probably have to chew on it for the rest of my life. Um, but yeah, I can't think of anybody else I'd get better advice from, honestly.
I imagine that's right. I can't. I imagine that is right. I mean, that's the first that anyone said, and I love it, and I think it's so true. Who else? Who better? I mean, right?
Honestly,
So
and
a lot of people.
exactly. And
Yeah.
I am a Christian, but I'm just saying it from the perspective of I just think he's just the coolest person ever. Like his thoughtfulness and his ability to really see past just the obvious thing, and give really
Yeah.
profound advice. I'll take that advice. At least I'll definitely try to understand it the best I can.
That's beautiful. Thank you. That's really nice. Now, looking forward, future looking, what's one goal that you would like to achieve in the next 5 years? I guess at this point, you would also be interesting to hear what Kunda Kids also has planned for the next 5 years.
I'll separate personal goals for Kunda Kids goals, just for the purpose of clarity, but I think that there's probably going to be an overlap with both of them. So I'd say one of the main goals I'd really like to see Kunda Kids be able to achieve is a shift in the mindset of individuals. And what has to start with individuals, but also I hope to see it manifested in the industries that individuals run, is that if it's good enough for UK television, if it's good enough for US programming, if it's good enough for um, the curriculums in the worlds that are in the places that the world upholds as best of class, I would put it that way, then it's good enough for Africa. And one of the things that we're finding, especially learning about other, content creators and people in this space, is that they're huge shortcuts in terms of quality, in terms of how people are paid, in terms of the working conditions, in terms of a number of things that happen when working in and producing for African audiences. It is always it is always it's always sort of made to feel as if it's good enough for Africa, which is why when we see on sometimes on multi-choice programming, or on programming and on channels and on content, that it's not great, but it's good enough. It's good enough for Africa. I saw this a lot in the kind of the resources that go out to African markets as well. The amount of time and attention that is spent on US markets, even around the world, basically. I really want to improve the expectation of quality in the content and educational resources that children in Africa get to enjoy. And I want Kunda Kids to be a pioneer in not letting content across the continent and for the diaspora um, be second best, and that be okay, right? And I'm really hoping that we're going to make significant traction in that very soon, and we plan to. And it hasn't been easy trying to achieve what we've been able to achieve at a world-class level with a small team and very limited resources. But also, sometimes it's not necessarily about all the resources that you have. It's about the intention behind what you want to do. We know so many organizations that have received tens and hundreds and of millions of pounds to redefine this space, and those resources are really not well accounted for. So we want to be the change that we would like to see in that front. And I don't expect us to not be met with resistance, but I'm ready for it. So yeah, so that's one of the things I'd really like to see. Is not just a reimagining, but practically changing the expectation of what happens on the African continent, and increasing our own expectations of what we deserve to have and consume. In terms of what future facing for me personally, I really am so excited, Nicole, about the opportunity to give back to other female founders one day. I mean, having gone through what I've gone through and learned what I've learned, I'm so excited to pass the baton on. And when I started Kunda Kids, I even was very happy to know that I might not even be around to see the kind of change and impact that we're going to make, right? It might be that the biggest achievements that Kunda Kids will have and the biggest influence that we'll have will happen and be able to be seen even at a time when I'm not even around. But whilst I'm here, I really hope to get to a level of success where I have the resources to be able to inject into other bright thinkers, into other female founders in particular. And I know that this journey was only made possible genuinely by people believing in us and knowing that they might not get their money back, but they really believed in not only our vision but our reputation as individuals. And only 80% of Black businesses are self-funded. And when you think about the fact that the majority of Africans and Afro-Caribbeans are entrepreneurs in one way or another because they have side hustles and side businesses and side projects, but unfortunately we especially Black female founders only what's the statistic I'm trying to remember. So I'm a female founder that has received pre-seed funding, right? We've closed our pre-seed round late 2022. Only 0.2% of female founders get pre-seed funding. And actually, they're very generous to round that number up to 1%. But in reality, it's 0.2% of Black female founders get pre-seed funding, get institutional funding at pre-seed stage. So I would really love to see that change. I know that we are in an environment where we talk about diversity and inclusion and improving equity. And it sounds like a lot of businesses are focusing on female founders and Black female founders, but I'd really like that to be addressed in actuality. I think there's really a lot more talk than action happening in that space. And I would love to be in a position where I can positively contribute to that in 5 years' time, at least. And also, I think just a ripple effect of that would also be able to contribute to the creative economy, especially in Africa, we produce so much of our content out of Africa. Our animations are produced entirely in Uganda. We work with an incredible studio that's owned by Disney director Ray Malinga, and they're called Creatures Animations, and they produce Kunda and Friends, and they're just a fantastic team. Every episode gets better. Like, they make it a personal mission to exceed the quality on everything. And I think that the talent in Africa is there, but the funding is not there, the support is not there, the training is not there. And even the training and the support still comes down to the funding. So, in addition to being able to fund individual founders, I would love to be able to have a more practical, tangible contribution to the growth of the creative economy in Africa.
Well, that sounds all amazing, Louisa. And I have no doubt that you're going to reach all of those goals because you are just such a powerhouse. And from what I have obviously read about you from the moment I met you, I knew you were so special. And reading about your background, your story, and what you've shared with us today, honestly, I have no doubt you are going to reach all of those goals, and so will Kunda Kid. And I'm super excited that I get to watch from the sidelines cheering you on. And I'm sure a lot of EnvisionAirs will be also doing the same. So I just want to say thank you so much again for being on the EnvisionAir podcast. You were such a light and such an inspiration. And I really just want to say thank you again. And please let the EnvisionAirs know how we can follow and support. So please do let us know how best to reach out to you, follow you, etc.
Okay, so one of the great ways to find out what we're up to is on social media. So I'll say Instagram is our favorite place for keeping people up to date with what we're doing, new books we're releasing, and even physical events that we'll be doing. So we're at Kunda Kids. That's KundaKids, all one word, on everything. So there's Instagram, there's our Twitter, which is a great space for us to have conversations with teachers, and we're also on Facebook too. We love to be in physical places. So you and I, Nicole, we met at the UK Black Business Show, and we love to do as many road shows as we can. We're also going to be in a number of different regions this year, which we're excited about. We're going to be in Texas in February. We're going to be in Nairobi this year. We're going to Finland and Helsinki in August. I believe we are going to Abuja in May, back in Lagos towards the end of the year. So we always try to make sure that we have as much physical presence as possible. We love to create events where people can bring their family. I know it's not always easy to have kids and have fun at the same time, but at a Kunda Kids event you can. And I'm usually there. Dele is there. We love to meet people who followed us on our journey. So find us at Kunda Kids, and also find out more about our animated series Kunda and Friends, which is on YouTube and doing superbly well. We just have the best songs. It's Afro beats, nursery rhymes, and all of our songs are on Spotify and Apple Music as well. So really anywhere that you consume content for children and for the family, you can find us. And last but not least, the Kunda Kids app is on the Google Play Store and on the Apple App Store as well, with a beautiful library of children's stories. And you can also look at our animations, our language learning animations, where you can learn basic words and phrases in lots of languages, including Yoruba, Swahili, Tree, Wolof, Luganda. So, you can have a great time with that. But by all means, I'm Louisa Olafuyi on social media, and I also have a blog that I run on Substack as well. So if you Google my name, you'll find me everywhere. But I think that that's plenty of plugs.
Well, thank you so much again, Louisa, for this. I'll put everything in the show notes, so not to worry. Everyone can follow and find everything. And I just want to say thank you again for being part of the EnvisionAir podcast. Lots of love. If you want to see more videos like this, make sure you hit subscribe and check out this video here.